If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the show, we'll talk with St. Louis County Councilwoman Rita Days about the county's perilous budget situation and the uproar over building a new animal shelter. We'll also talk about which Missouri contests could be national barometers in next year's midterm election cycle. But first, Sunday will mark 6 months since a tornado devastated portions of St. Louis and St. Louis County. The storm decimated a large portion of North St. Louis, a part of the city that had already been struggling for decades with disinvestment and crime. Since some officials estimate that the storm inflicted nearly $2 billion worth of damage, nobody expects the rebuilding process to be quick or easy. But elected officials and social service agencies are gravely concerned about where storm victims will go as winter approaches. Earlier this week, I spoke with St. Louis Mayor Cara Spencer at City Hall about where St. Louis stands in its long road to recovery. We also discussed difficulties in getting funds to affected residents and whether regional cooperation could help strengthen emergency preparedness in the future. I started off by asking Mayor Spencer what she's heard from storm victims recently and whether they think the governmental response has been adequate.
Boy, it really runs the gamut, Jason. We were on Tuesday giving out food at a food, for veterans. And so many folks came through the line that identified themselves as folks who had been, their homes had been destroyed by the tornado. And the responses varied. People expressed a heartbreaking sense of devastation, personal devastation. But there was also so much gratitude for what the city has been able to do. There was a recognition that there's still so much left to be done. There was disappointment, there's fear, there's heartbreak. The span of emotions that people express is just, it's indescribable. There's every emotion under the sun. And I think, as to be expected, we had such an unexpected, massive sense of devastation hit our city. And we are still processing it as a community, as are the individuals who have been impacted by it most.
St. Louis Public Radio reporters recently spoke with a number of tornado victims, and I think that the common thing they want to know is what is slowing down the distribution of tornado-related funds. I understand it takes time for money to go from government to individuals, but I think that these people want specific reasons why the money flow has not been quicker.
Yeah, that has been a really, really big challenge on our end. Right off the bat, I think one of our key focus areas was partnering and getting FEMA support, recognizing just that's the large sense of money that we needed to come into our community. And there has been, first I'll say, there is a huge gap in what residents need and what we've been able to provide. That is unequivocal, just an enormous, a gulf of need that we have been unable to meet at this time. But at the same time, there have been quite a few things that we have been able to do. The city has already spent over $30 million in just direct services. We have secured individual assistance from FEMA of over $50 million that have gone directly to residents, not nearly enough to make their lives whole, their homes whole, and that is certainly true.
Because you said the damage could be as much as $2 billion.
Absolutely. And that is just an estimate. That is just what we're estimating the damage to be done. that has been done, and that, to get the debris and demolition work completed, the estimates on just that work product alone have spanned $200 million to upwards of $750 million. And so we're still trying to wrap our heads and our figures around what the damage actually costs. Part of the issue has been, the city's emergency response command unit was 5 employees deep when the tornado struck. And so we have been building out the apparatus within city government to actually run the response as we are responding. And that has been an enormous challenge. We are using taxpayer dollars in large part to fund the effort that the city is able to come to the table with. And there are processes, and there's a clear sense that there's a responsibility to do that in legal terms, legal ways, and ways that unfortunately take time to get out the door.
For example, I could imagine verifying that they actually are entitled to certain money takes time. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. But some of the other big projects, debris removal, for example, we had contracts in place with Spiritus, for example, to remove large amounts of debris, and those didn't work out the way we had originally intended them to.
Why not?
There was a scope change, a failure to really understand the full scope, I think, on the part of the contractor. I think there was an earnestness on their part to want to fulfill the needs, and there was a disconnect there. And so, there's also, just the contracting piece is so arduous. We have, in order to spend dollars, have to go through the Board of Aldermen, the Board of V&A, have to go through procurement. We have emergency orders in place that have allowed us to fast track a lot of this. But, we've also got to make sure that, for example, we have programs to repair people's homes. And when we have contractors going out there to either remove debris or do work to stabilize homes, we want to make sure that those contractors are qualified and can do the work. There's a whole host of things that go into building up these programs that unfortunately have taken quite a bit of time to get going.
I've watched a couple of meetings about the future of the tornado recovery, and there are some residents that just want the entirety of the Rams money to go towards rebuilding North St. Louis and strengthening North St. Louis. Now, it's easy to memory hole that 9-10 months ago, that was not really what anybody in that discussion wanted. They wanted a lot to go to North St. Louis, but also a lot of money to go downtown and even into things like childcare. And I'm sure that other people that want that money probably don't want it spent in one place. But what do you say to the people of North City who see that tranche of money and say, we've been neglected, disrespected, and sometimes purposely disinvested for the last 50 years?
50 years or more.
50 years or more, and that's where the money should go.
First, to acknowledge that perspective is rooted in truth and reality, and the lived experience and the real experience of St. Louis, of our city. So, and I will also say that that perspective is rooted in a fair desire to rebuild the area that impacted by the tornado that, as you pointed out, has been disinvested of. So there's a true need there that far exceeds even what the Rams settlement funds could provide. That being said, and before the tornado, I was pretty clear in my intentions of having those funds be distributed in a way that can reinvest in North St. Louis. And I still stand behind that. I think it's important that as we move through reinvesting in the area impacted by the tornado, that plan is driven by those impacted. And so, our plan, my hope for the Rams settlement funds is that we shift more funds into investing in North St. Louis while being mindful of the broader city's needs, the infrastructure, the water, the streets, and other things that we have to invest in citywide, and recognizing that the future of our city does depend on having a robust downtown that can be the economic driver that really subsidizes the rest of the city, and that is in bad need of investment as well. So I think taking a balanced approach here is the key that that's going to provide the brightest future for the city as a whole.
I want to shift to the winter because I think obviously if your home was destroyed or heavily damaged by the tornado, how you've reacted since then is probably dependent on your individual situation. So for instance, if your house was damaged but is repairable, you may still be in it. If your house was damaged and unlivable, you might have moved somewhere else. But there are a lot of people who have been sleeping in tents or been sleeping in damaged property that they own. What is the city going to do to accommodate people so that they have a safe place to live as the temperature gets colder?
To be clear, my top priority right now is winter planning. That is my top priority and the top priority of everybody in the mayor's office right now. And we recognize, as you pointed out, that there are folks that are not homeless, that for all intents and purpose, when temperatures get below freezing, are going to be in exceptionally vulnerable situation and dangerous. So we are focused on providing shelter for everybody who needs it this winter. And I'm enormously grateful to the work that we stood up a winter planning task force that is being led by myself, Julian Nix, and several members of the provider community and advocacy community outside of city government. We've been meeting for several weeks now, and we unfortunately or fortunately had a dry run just earlier this week when temperatures got below 30, both Sunday and Monday night. So I'll say what we're doing is twofold, really making sure that we have enough shelter space for the traditionally unhoused population, which we're estimating right now to be around 600 folks. And we are expanding the beds available to include folks that have been impacted by the tornado. We're also simultaneously working to ensure that we have a rental assistance program that can put families and vulnerable folks that were impacted by the tornado in apartments when possible to get through the winter, to make sure that when possible, we're avoiding putting families in congregate shelter if we can.
I think there might be people listening who may be like, why are people staying in damaged homes, or why are they in their tents? And I'm gonna put myself in their shoes for a minute. That's their property. Just because it was damaged by the tornado does not mean they gave up their home or their property. And I think that there could be, in some situations, real concerns if they leave that property. Things are going to get stolen in terms of possessions. Our building material is going to get stolen. And that may make them, even when it gets cold, really hesitant to leave. So with the caveat, you no longer directly control the St. Louis Police Department, but you are on the board of the new police board. What is the city going to do to make sure that that property that those people owned is going to be protected if they go into shelter or temporary apartments?
Well, you're right. I mean, I think, if my home were badly damaged, I would absolutely stay in my home. It's my home. And for many folks, like myself, your home is our biggest asset. And so I think it's absolutely reasonable, expected that folks would stay in their homes. And frankly, if you are missing a roof or having missing windows still, as many people still are, this is albeit uncomfortable, but a livable situation even in St. Louis summers. Certainly this fall has been pretty nice weather. But this becomes, as you pointed out, extremely dangerous when temperatures get very low. So we do expect that many folks that have been staying, sheltering, living in their own homes will be unable to do so when temperatures get very low. So your question, though, when folks are forced out of their buildings, what is the city, the police department going to do to make sure that the community is safe? Immediately following the tornado, our police department did a truly phenomenal job of ensuring that the community was safe of looting. We did have some limited reports of looting, but by and large, the St. Louis Police Department did an absolutely phenomenal job of doing that. And we're going to lean into our partnership there to ensure that we're addressing concerns this winter as well.
I want to move on to FEMA, because I think both of us recognized, or not just both of us, every policymaker from federal on down to local recognized FEMA's assistance was critical for the recovery. But I've talked with pretty much everybody across the spectrum, from like the farthest left to the farthest right, and nobody is really satisfied with how FEMA has responded to this tornado. I'm wondering if you're in that category of people who have not particularly been happy with the federal response.
Well, in the hours following the tornado, we fully expected that FEMA would show up and run the response, much like they did in Joplin or following other major disasters across the United States. That did not happen here. And so it took several weeks to get FEMA engaged, to get the declaration. And that was the direct result of a partnership with our governor and our federal delegation. But I have to say, it's both and at the same time, because I have been frustrated. We have all been frustrated and disappointed with FEMA's failure to drive the response, providing housing, providing food, the logistical nightmare that was immediately apparent in the hours, certainly days and weeks following the tornado, that we were building as we went. That being said, the folks on the ground, when FEMA did show up, I'm thinking of Willie Nunn and his team, were absolutely phenomenal. Hands-on, truly cared, and were partners with us. So what limited resources FEMA was able to provide us, they were truly phenomenal. That being said, I think the key here for our country is we need to be really seriously thinking and asking ourselves, what do we want from our federal government, and what do we want to expect from our local jurisdictions? Do we want a nation where every city is prepared and has the tools and the readiness to respond to a tornado, an earthquake, or other massive disaster that may or may not strike? Or do we want to centralize that response unit in a federally funded and functioning and responsive FEMA? My argument would be that as a nation, we would be better off, more efficient, and certainly more effective if we centralize and share the resources and expertise across the nation for very unusual events, rather than saddling every single municipal government to being able to respond to what may or may not happen in the lifetime of each of those cities.
When I read and heard about all the problems with the sirens, my first thought was, why doesn't St. Louis County, and frankly Jefferson and St. Charles County, have one emergency response center? And I know the details of that are really hard. Like, St. Louis City has one police department and they have one fire department, and all those other jurisdictions have a lot more. What do you think regional leaders should do to make sure the emergency response is more integrated, so we don't have an emergency response that was frankly lacking in the city of St. Louis?
Yeah, I think you're spot on that mass disasters know no political boundaries, and we absolutely need to be thinking about a regional response. And there is some level of that through STARS, and East-West Gateway does have some component of it. But it was clear to us that the city of St. Louis did not have as robust and integrated response component as was ideal for us to be able to respond. Having those mutual aid agreements, not just across fire and police, which we did have in place and were very, very helpful in the hours, days following the tornado, but with forestry departments, with streets departments, with other departments that could have been more helpful in lending their staff expertise and equipment to debris removal and other things that we needed to conduct right away. So it's clear to us that establishing a better regional protocol response and integrated collaborative response would have been better for all. And we are committed to building that in the future. We're going to be announcing a new SEMA director here in the coming days, and I'm excited to bring that person's perspective to the table, which I know to be rooted in a regional apparatus for responding to disasters.
That was St. Louis Mayor Cara Spencer, who spoke with me from her office in City Hall earlier this week. You can listen to an extended version of this interview by going to STLPR.org. We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll examine the 2026 Missouri elections that could foretell a national Democratic wave or continued GOP dominance. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Let's talk about something that can make or break an election: enthusiasm. That emotion, enthusiasm, is admittingly difficult to measure. But it's a general rule of thumb in American politics that if a political party's voters are more energized during an election cycle, then they'll likely do better. Right now, Democrats are arguably winning the enthusiasm battle, even in a decidedly Republican state like Missouri. Don't take my word for it. Here's University City resident Mary Neal talking about how she's feeling about Democratic candidates a year before the 2026 midterm elections.
They're awesome. I'm just so excited about 26. I think it's going to be a great election.
There's perfectly logical reasons why Democrats like Neal would feel this way. President Donald Trump's approval ratings are low, and the president's party usually does poorly in midterm elections. And there's also hard data from the results of last week's elections in Virginia.
That in 2025, Virginia chose pragmatism over partisanship.
New Jersey.
And people around the country have heard you.
California.
And tonight, after poking the bear, this bear roared.
And New York City.
My friends, we have toppled a political dynasty.
Of course, Missouri is not California, New Jersey, or New York City. It's not even really comparable to Virginia, which possesses some swingy tendencies, but almost always votes for Democratic presidential candidates. In fact, it's difficult to use Missouri as a political barometer for the 2026 midterm elections. The state won't have a high-stakes gubernatorial or U.S. Senate contest on the ballot, and the only statewide race is Republican State Auditor Scott Fitzpatrick's re-election bid, and even Democrats would concede he's favored to win. Still, that doesn't mean there's nothing on Missouri's ballot next year that could showcase whether Democrats or Republicans are riding high nationally in the midterm elections. You just have to know where to look. Some of the Missouri barometers are pretty obvious, like Congresswoman Ann Wagner's re-election bid in Missouri's 2nd Congressional District. The Baldwin Republican is trying to win another term in office against several Democratic candidates, including Wildwood resident and podcaster Fred Wellman. Earlier this week at the Kirkwood Performing Arts Center, several hundred people heard Wellman and his supporters talk about his bid to capture the seat that includes parts of St. Louis, St. Charles, and Warren counties, and all of Franklin County. And even the most optimistic Democrat would concede that this is not an easy task. Wagner managed to prevail multiple times in the 2nd District, even as the St. Louis County portion got significantly more Democratic in the Trump era. And under a new congressional map passed earlier this year that is currently being litigated, the 2nd District gets even more Republican-leaning. But national Democrats have, at least for now, targeted the district, something that Wellman says makes sense given dissatisfaction with the economy and with the GOP-controlled Congress. He added that if Democrats in Missouri are going to be able to emulate Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger or New Jersey Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill, they'll have to work for it.
It's the gut work of being in a campaign. It's getting out and meeting people, having conversations, introducing them to what we stand for, showing that we stand for something other than what they think we do. And so I think what you saw, especially in Virginia, was these candidates did a lot of work. I know folks there. I know Mikey. I know Abigail Spanberger. They went out constantly. They hustled. And there's a hustle factor that goes into this, and I think that's a big part of it. You run everywhere, and you hustle everywhere, and that makes a big difference.
Even if Democrats don't flip this seat, keeping it close like they did in 2018 and 2020 could be a sign that the 2026 election is going well nationally. But Democrats will have to do more than just obtain moral victories as a benchmark of success in 2026. They'll have to defeat a Republican-backed measure that would make it harder for citizens to put initiatives on the ballot, and one that would overturn much of a 2024 constitutional amendment that protects abortion rights. Both of these GOP-supported measures are expected to have vigorous and well-funded opposition campaigns. And State Representative Mark Boyko of Kirkwood says that if Missourians preserve the initiative petition process and constitutional protections for abortion rights, it probably means Republicans are not having a great night elsewhere.
What we saw this last session was Republicans committed to overturning what not only was in the best interest of Missourians, but also the clearly stated preference of Missourians across a wide variety of issues.
At the same time, there's another effort known as the Respect Mo Voters Initiative, which could be another midterm benchmark to watch. This effort would severely restrict the legislature's ability to undo measures voters have already approved. Organizers say they've already gathered nearly 100,000 signatures. And the proposal may be gaining some momentum after Republicans repealed voter-approved paid sick time and sought to dismantle the 2024 abortion rights measure. Boyko says the outcome there could be telling.
I think that Missourians are particularly concerned about pocketbook issues like, the ability to get paid sick leave and minimum wage increases that the Republicans have targeted last time. And fortunately, the citizens will have a chance to revisit that issue.
Aside from the 2nd congressional district race, down-ballot contests could also provide signs of national Democratic strength or weakness. That's true for state House races, particularly in western St. Louis County. Even though voters in that part of the state easily backed the abortion rights initiative, they also re-elected Republican state lawmakers in 2024 who openly opposed that plan. This was deeply frustrating for Democrats because it showed pretty conclusively that progressive ballot items did not have coattails. Some Democrats are banking on 2026 being different. Claire Heinrich, for instance, is running for Missouri's 110th district, which takes in portions of Wildwood and Clarkson Valley. Those are parts of St. Louis County that have voted for Republicans for literally generations. She contends the national enthusiasm for Democrats is trickling down to her bid to flip the seat.
I could definitely see that changing over time, and I think some of it is ways in which people in those areas have been let down by their government, so policies that are not necessarily friendly to those areas. I'm thinking things like our school funding, things like our roads and our land projects getting taken out of state legislation. I think people are feeling forgotten and left behind.
It's not just St. Louis County House races that could showcase an uptick in Democratic fortunes. Linda Thompson is running once again for a House seat in Franklin County. She got only roughly 28% of the vote in 2024, which is a steep decline from a couple of decades ago when Democrats either won seats in the county or at least held Republicans below 60% of the vote. Thompson knows she's the underdog, but she says eventually lowering the margins of GOP candidates is part of the slow process of rebuilding the Missouri Democratic Party.
I think once we break that hole that they have on the people and we start going out to let people know Democrats are there again, we'll be able to see some of that 40% and have real contests again that we haven't seen lately.
Perhaps Frank Barnitz knows the value of competing in places where Democrats are not expecting to win. Barnitz is a cattle producer who also happens to be a former state legislator. In 2005, Barnitz shocked a lot of people in the Missouri political world by capturing a fairly GOP-leaning Senate seat that encompassed places like Phelps and Dent counties. The Democrat won a full term in 2006 with some memorable television ads, including one where he appeared with a giant cowboy hat.
I'm Frank Barnitz, and that's no bull.
But Barnitz's state Senate victory opened up his state House seat. And in a special election, a Republican attorney named Jason Smith prevailed, the first step in his political journey that led him to winning the Southeast Missouri-based 8th Congressional District seat. Smith is now the chairman of the powerful Ways and Means Committee. Barnitz says he doesn't regret the political dominoes that followed, but he believes voters in the 8th District who back candidates like Smith and Trump are not happy. That's especially the case as Trump's tariffs have injected instability into some agricultural and business markets. Barnitz says he's seriously considering running against Smith next year, joining a couple other Democrats who are angling to take on the Salem Republican.
Is he in a powerful position? Absolutely. Is he a powerful decision maker? I don't believe that. He's been given a position for the purpose of answering to the upper part of the Republican control, the powers to be.
Barnitz is not naive to think that it would be easy to beat Smith, whose campaign did not return a request for comment. Smith has regularly received over 70% of the vote, even though parts of Southeast Missouri have historical Democratic leanings. But if Barnitz is able to lower Smith's margin of victory, it could show that Missouri is following places like rural Virginia in voting much less enthusiastically for Republicans.
They have to be of an independent mind. They have to look at the issue, look at the situation, and see what's best for them. And then see what has occurred under the leadership that they've been given or that they voted for in the past. Have you become better off today than you were yesterday under a different control? Well, I'd say in most cases, no, they haven't been. And we're trying to give them that new look to be able to say, okay, let's give this guy a try.
A year is an eternity in politics, and it's probably not a wise idea to assume that just because Democrats did well in November 2025, that they'll romp to victory in November 2026. Some prominent Republicans, like U.S. Senator Eric Schmidt, are trying to take that posture when analyzing the results of last week's elections.
The Republican Party now, which, as I've told you before, I feel very much at home now, is more of a working class party. It's a broad-based political party, which means there's more lower propensity voters in the party. So unlike before, when I was growing up in Missouri, Republicans perform better in presidential years than they do in midterms. And that's a challenge long term. I'd rather have that problem than the other side of it. But so again, I don't think there's too much to glean from this.
Still, if Democratic buoyancy does lead to the party capturing Congress next year, there could be a ripple effect in Missouri, even if the state remains a solid GOP stronghold. We need to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk with St. Louis County Councilwoman Rita Days about St. Louis County's grim budgetary future. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. St. Louis County officials are dealing with a sobering reality. The budget is nearly $80 million in the red, and the combination of reserve funds and special pots of money like the NFL settlement will dry up in the near future without a significant course correction. In essence, St. Louis County Executive Sam Page and members of the County Council have politically difficult choices to make. That could include cutting county services significantly and raising taxes to bring in more revenue. And perhaps unsurprisingly for people who follow St. Louis County government, there's a lot of disagreement between Page and the County Council about which direction to go. I spoke with St. Louis County Council Chairwoman Rita Days in her office in Clayton earlier this week. The Belle-Nor Democrat discussed this year's contentious budget battle, as well as controversy over building a new animal shelter. I started by asking her to describe just how dire the county's budgetary problems are.
I cannot explain how dire it really is. We are looking at $81 million was the last count that I had from our budget coordinator, that we're $81 million in the hole. And I don't know how you can, I guess it could get worse, but that's the worst that I have ever seen it.
St. Louis County Executive Sam Page wants to use a combination of budgetary reserves and part of the St. Louis Rams settlement to fill that $80 million gap for what's known as the general fund, which covers a lot of county government services, and the health department fund. Is that something you think the council will end up doing?
I do not think that we're going to do that. I don't think it's wise to spend one-time funding for ongoing services. What will we do next year? We still have the same issue, and so that addressing that in that way will not help.
From talking with Page earlier this year, the reserve funds and the NFL settlement is only going to last maybe another year or two more before the county does not have money to fill that budgetary hole. So he suggested placing what's known as the use tax, which is effectively a tax on online purchases, on the ballot again in 2026 as a way to raise money. What do you think of that idea?
Clearly, it's a way to generate additional revenue, and I'm generally supportive of a use tax. If you don't shop online, then you don't pay the tax. But I think again, it's not fair for a brick and mortar to have to, charge taxes like that, and then online purchases don't. I don't think that is the answer. I think that is part of the answer, but we have to get control of the spending. We cannot continue to just spend as we want and not have any kind of parameters around that.
I think I asked about the possibility of a use tax because voters somewhat recently rejected it. I guess if it's messaged in a way where you say we need to pass this or we cut county services, is it possible that may be more palatable in 2026?
In this last election, I believe there were a couple of munis that passed that, and several munis have already done that. It took them a couple of times to do that, but we have not. We've not put it on for us to pass that. I think it's not a good time right now in April. I think that's what the push is for April. Not sure if that's going to be a good idea or not. I think it needs messaging. It needs strong messaging as to what it actually means.
I think that the use tax does seem kind of like low-hanging fruit for the reasons you mentioned. But if it fails or the council doesn't want to put it on the ballot, as far as tax increases, there really aren't a lot of good options that are going to be widely popular. You could raise property taxes, but nobody likes paying more in property taxes. You could figure out some sort of other sales tax, but there's already a lot of sales taxes in St. Louis County. Is really the use tax the only tax increase you can think of at the moment that would be toward the revenue side of this budgetary gap?
right now it seems to be the only viable alternative that we have. But again, we have to get a control of the spending, and people are not likely to continue to support paying more taxes, and it doesn't seem that you're responsible in the spending area.
Okay, so let's talk about spending, because eventually part of this discussion is going to be about what you end up cutting or eliminating from county government. I mean, I think it's going to have to be more than just taking away like certain vacant positions or certain employees. You may have to like rethink certain programs, or even if like the county should cover some global type services. Is that fair to say?
It's very fair to say. And what we have done and what we noticed was that we do a lot of things that we are not necessarily charged to do, either through charter or state law. There are a lot of things that we do because it's a nice thing to do. It's good, good for the public. But it becomes to a point where you can't afford those kinds of things. And so the council is really looking at pulling back to actually what we need to do in terms of mandatory expenditures that we must do.
Do you have any examples of things that are nice to do, but the county doesn't necessarily have to do?
Well, let's look at the health department, for instance. We're looking right now at an FQHC look-alike that we are investing in. That's about I'm not sure how many millions of dollars that is, but can we afford that? It's a nice thing to have. We have 3 centers. We have 2 in my district, actually 2 health centers, and we have 1 in South.
An FQ,
federally qualified health centers.
Got it.
And it's a look-alike, LAL. So we're not, it's just not a Fenier and those kinds of things, but we're a look-alike. And it's a good thing to do if you can afford to do it. But at this particular juncture, I don't think we can afford it.
I understand there's a combative dynamic between County Executive Page and the council, and I genuinely get that there's differences of opinion about how to deal with this looming budgetary calamity. We should not have like groupthink here, especially when cuts could actually have real consequences. But what's stopping all 8 of the people I'm talking about, the 7 members of the council and County Executive Page, getting into a room, coming up with a plan, and if you're gonna do cuts, you do it all together rather than just, it's like a game of volleyball where you're asking the council to make cuts or the county executive to make cuts?
Well, I think as part of leadership, you're asking, and you should be asking your department heads, listen, we have an $80 million deficit. What can you do without? What kind of services can we do without that we're not mandated to do? As people retire or leave the county, what kinds of technology can we use, to stand up some programs that don't necessarily need a person doing? I think we need to do a lot of that. And when all the departments come and they all have this bloated, I'm going to just say bloated budget, it doesn't bode well. We really have to be the ones to have the fortitude to say we can't afford this and what can we do without. If we look at half of those budget line items, many of those folks have only spent maybe 65 or 70% of their budget. There are only a couple of departments that I can think of off the top of my head that have spent 100% of their budget, and one of them is the police department, and we clearly understand that.
Let's move to the county animal shelter, where shelter staff are dealing with an overcrowding crisis. Last week, shelter director Malik Johnson told St. Louis Public Radio they are housing and caring for 180 animals in a facility that has a capacity for 80. You've introduced 2 bills that animal shelter leaders say would benefit the center and decrease its population, including a code amendment that would allow the shelter director to waive or reduce adoption fees, and a provision that would allow the shelter to accept gifts, grants, and donations that total more than $1,000. My understanding is those provisions have not been moved on by the council? What is kind of going on with those ideas?
Well, both of those are monetary items. We don't have the money for that. The first one was the $3 million, and that was to pass inspection. When the inspectors came, we had three things that needed to do. We needed to do. We needed to put the tops on the dog food so that the vermin didn't get in the dog food. We had to clean the poop up in the yard, and then we had to throw out expired medications. In my mind, that's not $3 million. And I think the effort around here is to throw money at everything. Money is not all. Those kinds of things did not need additional funding in order to make them happen. We took care of those deficiencies. We passed the licensure, and now we are fully licensed. The other was to build another building. You cannot build your way out of the congestion that we have there. I equated that to the jail. The jail right now is overcrowded. Are we going to go and build another jail so that we can continue to warehouse people? No, we're not going to do that. So we have to manage our population. There's a population manager at the ACC. They have to do a better job of managing the animals there.
So just to make sure I understand you, for waiving or reducing adoption fees is not really a feasible option right now because the loss in county revenue would be pretty substantial, and it's not something the county can just fill in the gaps on, basically.
Well, no, we have not been able to do that. And I think that having those kinds of opportunities every now and then, that's great. But we just can't open up the doors and say, okay, come and get an animal. You know, we have to pay for the dog food. We have to pay for the shelter. We have to pay for everything that is involved in making sure that those animals are appropriately cared for. And again, it's a matter of management, and that's my opinion.
Well, let's talk again about the proposal to use $20 million in RAM settlement funds for improvements to the animal shelter. We've heard from several St. Louis Public Radio listeners who would like to see those funds used to provide additional support to shelters. I think that this has been sitting on the agenda or sitting kind of in limbo for a while. You mentioned that you didn't want to build another shelter and you compared it to the jail. But isn't this kind of what the RAMS money is for, these one-time projects that could provide long-term benefit?
But is that a one-time project? I don't think that that's a one-time opportunity because let's just say we build a facility for 300 animals. And then we get 300 animals. Then do we have to build another facility for that? I mean, that's sort of kind of an elemental way of looking at that, but that's essentially what you're saying. I think the answer has to be around the population management and how we manage our animals in the shelter.
Last month, the council passed a bill that raised adoption fees for dogs and cats from $40 to $80. County Executive Sam Page vetoed the bill, allowing this change, but this was actually unanimously overridden, which is very rare for the council. Why do you think that happened?
Because $40 has been the adoption rate for I don't know how many years, and it's not covering basic costs of caring for an animal. And so raising the fee to $88, and by the way, that's still among one of the lowest in the area. There are facilities at $120, $300 to adopt an animal. And so we compromised on $80 as manageable. I did say that if I found that from the director that there was a decrease in the number of adoptions, that we will look at it again. But my last conversation with the director was that we had several animals that had been adopted even with the $80 price.
So we've received a lot of listener interest in the animal shelter, which I'm not surprised on. One of the things I've noticed about county government, if it involves the animal shelter or parks, it usually has wide interest.
Absolutely.
Laura is a long-term volunteer at the St. Louis County Pet Adoption Center. She says, its limitations are duly noted, but the only outcome of closing the shelter is mass killing of hundreds of dogs and cats who did nothing to end up there and deserve loving homes. The use of the shelter as a political pawn is terrible at its root. I challenge the council members to come visit the shelter and engage with the animals whose lives are at stake, as well as to see the massive effort of their constituents who work tirelessly to save these animals. Have you visited the shelter, and what do you think of Laura's comments?
Well, I think Laura's comments are on point from her perspective. I have adopted about 4 animals from the shelter over the years, so I'm very familiar with that and how it works. And so I think that as we move forward in looking at that, it's a matter of operations. We have to have people in these shelters who know what they're doing. I do not advocate mass euthanasia, and I think that's where she's leading there for that.
In fact, Nikki, you actually led to the next comment.
Okay.
Nikki says, St. Louis County Shelter is not supported by the county council. Volunteers and staff have advocated for years to change ordinances that would help with the animal welfare crisis, but the council can't even be bothered to respond to communications from their constituents. The county council wants to turn the shelter into a pound, which means the only way for animals to leave is via licensed rescue or euthanasia. So you were about to talk about that particular subject of euthanasia. What is your kind of response to Nikki's comments?
I do not support mass euthanasia for population control. It's just that simple. We have to manage the population. We have to go out. I look at the newspaper and I see animals advertised. I see animals advertised on the television. I see animals at various locations and people looking to adopt. That's something that we need to include in our processes as we're looking at these animals. We have to get the animals out there. Who knows where they are? Our volunteers do a fantastic job. We could not absolutely run that place without the volunteers. But again, we have to understand there's limitations in what we can do, and we're doing the best we can with what we have.
That was St. Louis County Councilwoman Rita Days, a Belnor Democrat and the chairwoman of the St. Louis County Council.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wissentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.